was a
Right.
case
That
last
case,
year.
yeah.
There's probably going to be some legislation this year if anybody's interested in talking about that. The judge can also order someone to a correctional facility where they can't receive a particular form of treatment.
Right. Right. And that's a big issue. And not just correctional facility, but let's say the issue is they're ordering them to a specific program that prohibits a certain form of treatment. You know, ordering somebody into NA, for example, which is against using any medication and so on. So these are issues that are cropping up that we want to hear about to the extent that you're seeing anything like this. And talked through some of these. Parole is another issue where this is happening to the extent that this comes your way. And then there's 12 categories of public accommodations, but these are probably the only ones that really apply here. You know, we're talking about those health entities, social service center establishments, and so on. And so this is a case that I actually entered into a settlement agreement. I might actually have that. Nope, I don't. Okay. So there was a skilled nursing facility in, I think, North Attleboro, Massachusetts, that was turning people away who were on Suboxone. In fact, this was brought to my attention because the provider who was trying to put them in that facility got a message back that said, we can't handle patients with Suboxone, change the medication and we'll reconsider. And that was all I needed to enter into a settlement agreement. That settlement agreement was a $5,000 civil penalty and ordering them to have a non-discrimination policy on that basis. And also we have 2 years of monitoring. One of the advantages that we have, so we never represent actual individuals. We are the United States. And so it has benefits, it has disadvantages. So one of the benefits is that now we're monitoring this facility for 2 years because we represent the people, not just the actions of a specific person or the harm to a specific person. That said, we do things on behalf of people. It's a weird legal distinction where we can obtain money, we can obtain an injunctive relief for that person. We're just not that person's attorney. You know, that attorney-client privilege doesn't latch on, and we don't have an obligation to that person. Our obligation is to the United States. But it has advantages because what we try to do is get broad relief in scope. The skilled nursing facility, I know that SNFs, this is all SNFs. This is all skilled nursing facilities are engaged in this kind of conduct. And I'd love to hear about all of the skilled nursing facilities. I'm looking into others. They're, again, quite easy for me to work on. Litigation or settlement and negotiations, it's not immediate, it's not overnight, but we are moving on these. And after we entered into this settlement agreement, there was a skilled nursing home publication, like a trade magazine that they all have, that said something to the effect of, it talked about this case, and it said, this is just a one-time thing. The Department of Justice really isn't looking into this issue. But we are, and so, yeah.
They probably help you.
It does. So yeah, we are looking into this issue. We're looking into any medical facility that's doing this, and that's why the providers who aren't providing services to people because they're in recovery is absolutely something that we can address. We're doing it already around the country for HIV access. Individuals with HIV cannot be turned away, and we're still seeing it. You might be seeing this as well, dentists, doctors, and so on. But we're doing the same work here for people in recovery for OUD. and we just need to hear about it, and that's why I'm doing this kind of outreach. But I'm happy to be a resource for you. Yeah.
You mentioned before that union-based health insurance programs, and that's has there been a change in that?
No.
Will you be working on that, or are you currently?
So I can't comment on that, but I'd like to hear about any specific people who are affected. Yeah.
I'll defer to Richard. He has his hand up first.
Yeah.
I just have a question. If we're looking at how this is going to work with a lot of the clients that we work with, what kind of paper trail would be necessary? Because my assumption is that a lot of times when these conversations happen with providers, the denial, I would appreciate it. I know there's a couple providers in the room, if that would be something that would be documented, or what you would actually need on your end to kind of prove that this has taken place versus a conversation that just said, let's try this 6 months from now.
So that's a great question, and I've seen both forms. I've seen two different forms, two different helpful forms. One is, as I just mentioned, that note that said you can't do this. Not everybody's going to get that. Sometimes it's going to be a conversation. And I have seen the conversation, and what's helpful for the conversation is, let's say you're a provider and you have that conversation. Immediately email somebody saying who you just spoke with, like at that facility. Was it a man? Was it a woman? What was their name if you can remember it? What did they say specifically? What time did it happen at? Like, write down as much as you can remember about that conversation contemporaneously with when it happened. Send it to somebody else in your office, okay? And that is what happened in that another case, another sniff case. And interestingly, this is a case that I opened where I had this great documentation because they kept advocating for that person, and there was like 3 different phone calls in one day, and they're emailing back and forth. So like clearly they know who they're talking to. They're talking about this person. And then when I opened an investigation, that person's working. That person was working on that day. Yet in that facility had in their admissions logs 149 instances of turning people away on the basis of their medication. They did not have that one instance. So implying that there's probably a lot more than the 149. But also, it was very helpful to have that kind of, contemporaneous note-taking that you send to somebody, just from an evidentiary standpoint. It's not that I need that, but it's helpful. Yeah.
I just wanted to mention one resource that I use in this area is the ADA Center of New England.
Oh yeah.
So there's a lady named Oshie Harrison over there that's doing some work to outreach the recovery community. They have a line you can just call to ask these questions, which if you don't want to bother Greg, I'm sure he doesn't have a ton of time on his hands. And I wanted to ask, are you concerned that the more publicity these cases garner, the more employers and agencies that are not going to make it so obvious for you, that are going to deny people jobs for other reasons if they have these preconceptions? Yeah. And a follow-up to that is, this all kind of seems like it becomes null and void if somebody has a criminal record for a drug-related offense. Can you just comment on that as well?
Sure. I'm going to work backwards, and I might need prompting to remember some of the earlier questions. The last one, that's hard, right? The criminal background. If you're being refused, employment because of the criminal background, I mean that's pretty common, and that's not necessarily something that I can handle. Even if it's like just used as a pretext for this. It might be very difficult. Usually when I get people with Corey issues, I have referrals. I have contacts who work to seal Corys. So I would generally start there, and trying to get that low-hanging fruit out of the way. And please remind me of...
So what happens when people do start to use pretext?
Yes, so that's a great question. I anticipate it's going to happen, but that's where I've been in every other civil rights case already, right? So it just gives me back to that point. And we have tools that we use in those various civil rights matters that we then would just bring to bear here. It's not that we would go away. And ideally and hopefully, like some of the big, where would that affect? Would it affect the, the state and local government? Probably not as much, because there we're looking at their policies and procedures, and that's on the books. So that would probably hang around if we haven't addressed it already. We'd probably be talking about housing, and we'd probably be talking about these medical facilities, but we do have tools in those cases. And once you start hearing enough stories of the same thing happening at a facility for a number of people, then you start getting enough credible evidence that this is actually a practice that we're that is being engaged in. And that's the other thing. We generally look for patterns or practices. If you just have one case, still bring it to us of one instance.
Could I just ask you to clarify the scope of your office's mandate? Is it based on the statute, the civil rights statute that's at issue? Is it based on the industry that's at issue? Is it based on something else? And what I mean by the scope of the mandate is the division of responsibility as between the local DOJ office, the central DOJ office in DC, and maybe HHS, OCR, or some other enforcement agency. Just as by way of example, if you could address, like you talked about HIV access.
Yes.
So like if you have maybe an insurance benefit design scheme that you think violates the Affordable Care Act, the ADA, other civil rights statutes.
So no, it's a great question. Nabil, I'm gonna point to Nabil over here. Nabil is a colleague from the Maine Department of Justice in DC who's up today. We work hand in hand with the Maine Department of Justice. I mean, in a number of these cases, I'm working on concurrently with an attorney there. A number of the cases, it's just myself, and so really it does depend. And we're more of talking about resources than mandates, and it's a question of, do I need to pull somebody in from DC to work with me on this, because it's a little more complex and we might want to have a few thoughts. But we work hand in hand with the Maine Department of Justice on all of these issues, and to that extent, in Massachusetts, we're locally a little bit more out in front. Not every district has a U.S. Attorney's Office that has a civil rights unit. So we have 4 attorneys in our unit. We're actually the largest civil rights unit in the U.S. Attorney's Office with 4 attorneys. Usually everything is handled out of D.C. But we are pushing forth and kind of paving the way on this work specifically. In terms of the HIV work, again, we work hand in hand with them on that as well. I'm in regular contact with David Knight, who is in charge, or one of the main point people for the HIV access initiative out of the disability rights section of the Department of Justice. And he'll come up and do outreach with me, but essentially, like, if there's an active local U.S. Attorney's Office, it'll start there. And so it's just a matter of resources. The question about HHS is a great question, and they are also working in this sphere too. And often I will call my colleague up at HHS because I might think that they have better regulations to address a specific issue. And we might work together because I know that working with them, we can maybe get broader relief under their regulations in addition to the ADA. So the civil rights community at a federal level is rather tight-knit here up in Massachusetts, and we will always collaborate with our other federal partners. Does that get to the kind of your question? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just one follow-up. Do you have an opinion about the filing of an administrative complaint complaint as opposed, when you say you don't need a complaint, but something,
Yeah.
you'll take a complaint, wait, are you using that term colloquially, or are you talking about the filing of an official administrative complaint?
I don't need that. I don't need the filing of an official administrative complaint. HHS does. Most of the other federal agencies do. We have what's called compliance review authority. So whether or not you call something an investigation, which results from a complaint, or when the ADA was written, they gave the Department of Justice like the authority to just determine whenever we want to look at a place to see if they're complying with the ADA. So we use the term a little more colloquially, right? Because we have kind of this concurrent ability to say, you know what, we're gonna look at 20 restaurants to see if they all have wheelchair ramps. And we're gonna just point and pick on the map. We have that same power for this, right? So we get to use the term a little more loosely.
Great.
Any other questions?
I think we're a little bit. You're fine. Don't worry.
Oh,
About
okay.
it. Don't worry about the time. I intentionally let you go over.
Okay.
But I think thank you very much, Greg.
No problem.
I really appreciate it.
I'm going to leave my card in the back. So if you don't get one, Richard can give you my contact information.
So I just learned that we accidentally live streamed this to the wrong location, but we are going to be sharing this is someone's personal Facebook, but we will download the video and share it so that all of the people who aren't able to attend today can get this information. And I also encourage you, I think this is a really good opportunity, and I don't want this conversation to end, because I know every single one of us has a story of someone that we've come across that has been denied access to hepatitis C treatment, and I think we have an opportunity to really make a difference, and maybe make some waves in the community about this, because it's gotten to the point where we've done amazing things with Mass Health, but it really hasn't moved the needle when it comes to getting people treated. I think the most recent estimates around people who are actually treated in Massachusetts is at 3% of those infected with hepatitis C. That's about where we're at right now. So thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you.
I will be happy to share Greg's contact information, your slides.
Can you just give us the phone number?
Oh, sure, yeah. My phone number, anybody who wants to take my phone number, it's 617-748-3157. So 617-748-3157.